more politically appointed ambassadors than career diplomats. So we would want to know whether we have a policy that guides on the ratio. Thank you.
Senator Okenyuri.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to ask the Cabinet Secretary the following question: whether citizens in diaspora with the dual citizenship will also be required to register for Maisha card. Thank you.
Senator Kavindu Agnes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to first of all appreciate the CS for coming today. We've been waiting for him for a long, long time. Mr. Speaker, mine is a bit diverted, but he's aware of it, and I'm sure he can answer it. It's about how far he has gone with the issue of the compensation of the Kenyan victims, as in getting the amendment from the US Congress. Because when we were in America, we discussed about this in your presence, and you are aware of it, and I don't know how far you've gone with this issue. And I also want to know if you are aware that the victims who were at the embassy, serving at the Embassy of America here in Kenya, are getting the green cards to go to the US, and most of them are in their 80s. What are you doing about negotiating for them that their relatives who are younger can get the green cards and go and serve there? Because majority of them who are working there are now of age, and they cannot go and work unless they just go and stay there. And this is ongoing right now with the Embassy of America. Thank you.
Senator Osotsi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Prime CS, who is also my senior constituent from Vihiga County. Speaker, I would like to find out from the Prime CS. I can see from the response there is a disparity in numbers between New York and Los Angeles. Ordinarily, we would expect that New York, being the leading economic hub of the US, will have more focus around it. We can see in New York we have 1 staff, and Los Angeles we have 7. So what informs this disparity? Number 2, I am shocked with the low staffing levels in the embassies in the US, which means probably in other countries is even worse, Mr. Speaker. And we know that the trend globally is focused around economic diplomacy. So can the Prime CS tell us what plans he has to upscale economic diplomacy through these various embassies and consulates? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Veronica.
Honorable Speaker, and welcome once again, Prime Cabinet Secretary. Commendably, the IEBC rolled out the voting rights for the diaspora, and the diaspora remittances are some of the highest exchange earners for our country, so hence the need for them to continue exercising their right to the presidential vote, to determine the presidential vote. Honorable Cabinet Secretary, have you considered rolling out consulates in states where Kenyans are we have a heavy population of Kenyans, like Texas, Atlanta, besides Los Angeles and New York and Washington, where we have an embassy, seeing that these are the stations where the voting takes place in the United States? And have you also considered the cost of diaspora accessing this station is still very high? They would have to spend close to $1,000 to access a voting station when it's time for them to vote. What are you doing to mitigate that effect and reduction of cost and access to the stations where they need to vote every cycle of 5 years.
Senator Dulo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I wish to welcome CS. Mr. Speaker, I want to ask a question on office accommodation in various missions and commissions, missions and embassies. Mr. Speaker, I sit in Committee of National Security and Foreign Relations of this House. CS, we have tried to get in touch so that we can discuss matters affecting our particular committee, but we are unable to get you, and I don't want to prosecute that here. But I remember 2015, there was a motion passed on the floor of this House regarding office accommodation by then Senator Fonyeri, Senator Mutahi Kagwe. Mr. Speaker, our last visit to UAE, the embassies were actually complaining about the value of Kenya shilling that has gone down, which has doubled actually the rent that they are paying within those missions and embassies. I remember in that particular motion, the senator was requesting that the money you are paying for those rents should be actually used in form of a loan to pay for those properties the government is actually occupying. Mr. Speaker, I've been to Switzerland, Geneva. The kind of office that you have there, it's really very beautiful, and we really get very encouraged when we visit those offices. If you look at New York, Mr. Speaker, we are renting a property as Kenyan government when Uganda has a very huge building in New York City. Really, it's so embarrassing. And I want to know what the ministry is doing as far as this office accommodation is concerned. I thank you.
Prime CS, you may now proceed to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are several critical issues that have been raised, so I'll respond to them not in any specific order, but just as I was taking the notes. Now, the first issue is to do with the tribal or ethnic balance that was raised. I want to state very clearly that it is our intention, and we are very deliberate, that we need our missions always to reflect the face of Kenya, the diversity of Kenya, and therefore we will work to achieve this in all our missions. I may not have everything in terms of the community that one comes from, but I took note of what Mongatana was saying, and it's a very pertinent point, that in the deployment of officers, it is important that all parts of Kenya are represented. And I would want to believe that I'll be better prepared to respond to this particular question, even as a separate item. The second point I would like to point out on this particular issue is that the question that arises about the ratio of the career diplomats and the incoming or other appointees that are infused from other sectors, whether private sector or the political realm, that come into the diplomatic space. And that again is a valid question. And Mr. Speaker, I want to perhaps announce to the House today that we are in the process of formulating a sessional paper which will be discussed by Parliament. And one of the critical issues that we'll be putting across in this sessional paper is for us to have a conversation as a country through our leadership as legislators so that we can establish a reasonable ratio so that we can have career progression for the diplomats who are in office or working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But at the same time, we can also work closely to bring in some infusion from outside, because it's always good to have this injection of ideas and approaches from the outside world. We should not necessarily be incestuous permanently. In this context, we should be able to infuse with other people. So this is going to be a very critical issue in that conversation. And I will be appealing to members to give it very good thought when the sessional paper is availed for this conversation. The other point I want to quickly point out was the issue of how many consulates can we open. We would have liked to have more, but we are constrained financially, and that is why we are still operating with the LA as the consulate in the United States. If resources permit in future, we can indeed increase the number of consulates. On the issue of the voting, I think it's important that this is a conversation that we shall have to have jointly with the IEBC, because again, when it comes to the issues of voter registration and access, that is a domain that falls within the IEBC, and we at Foreign Affairs would be more of a facilitator, but we cannot try to use up the role of the IEBC in terms of voter registration. And which should be the centers, but we can have a conversation at the appropriate time. I wish to make a correction. Indeed, I may have indicated the LA consulate and the New York consulate. Maybe I didn't communicate well. This was raised by Honorable Ososi. I wish to state that indeed in New York, we have a permanent mission. And in that permanent mission, which is the busiest station, as you say, we have an authorized establishment of 18, and they're in place, save for 4, as we speak now in New York. So perhaps that's an addition of supplemented information I will make available to show that the permanent mission is well staffed and there are people in station. The issue of our foreign service assets, that is the properties that we own and the ones that we may not own, that is a very, very important issue, because rental payments in the foreign countries is a very big burden. It consumes quite a lot of money in some of the stations. But I'm pleased to announce to the Kenyans that, through the Senate, to the Kenyans that as we speak now, Kenya bought a whole floor just next to the United Nations headquarters. And that is where the permanent mission is now domiciled. That's where the chancery is. So we have taken care of that particular item. We cannot, we missed our chances then. When Uganda bought, that was way back during the time of Idi Amin Dada. That's when he bought the asset for Uganda. We cannot say that we can afford to have the resources to buy a new building or a building today in New York, but we have money to secure a whole floor which is now occupied by the mission. I also want to state that in terms of our global assets, which we are talking about, in New York we have some properties as well, and in other stations, and we are developing a strategy on how to realize the value of our global assets, which includes development of the various properties, and to see how we can seek different financing mechanisms, either through PPP or joint programs with even some of our Kenyan financial institutions to be able to develop the assets that we have in different countries. And this again is a detail we'll share in the sessional paper that we shall be presenting to you. Mr. Speaker, I cannot speak for the American immigration policy. They have their own policy, and therefore we can only raise concerns on some of the issues and perhaps seek some negotiations, but we cannot impose our will on the American immigration policy. I have personally had my own experiences where sometimes what the ambassador is doing, they can become very clear and tell you that the State Department for Immigration is independent and handles its issues separately. So it takes much more. But I can say that as we negotiate the strategic trade and investment partnership agreement, that is the STIP, with the United States, and the negotiations are quite advanced, we hope that some of these issues can be tackled within the framework of that conversation. There is the issue of the compensation of the victims of the blast. We are pursuing that matter following the resolution of the House on that, so that we can engage formally with the Parliament or the Congress in the US. This is now underway following the resolution that was passed by our members of the legislature. And at an appropriate time, we will be able to report progress systematically, because it's a process that has to engage with their counterparts on the other side. There is one thing that I want to state, that indeed economic diplomacy is very critical to us. The United States is perhaps now our largest market when it comes to the export of apparel. We are close to, I think we are the largest exporter to them, and the market continues to grow. So we take our relationship with the United States very, very seriously in this context as a key and fundamental trading partner. And that is why you will find that during the recent state visit by the President, certain key issues were undertaken of enhancing the trade and partnership between us and the United States. As I've said, we are also negotiating the strategic trade and investment partnership agreement, and there are other programs that the Kenya government is working very, very closely with the United States, which have a major bearing on the economies of both countries, but more so on the Kenyan economy. Mr. Speaker, there's one issue that I may need to get a little more clarification, but that was the issue of the dual citizenship and the Maisha card. If the Speaker allows, we can do a little more research on this specific item and communicate to the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Senator Muma.
My question on policy, the policy on the ratio between diplomats, politically appointed diplomats and career diplomats.
I did respond to it. I said that we may not have a firm figure, but for instance, I could give you what I think. For instance, a proportion of about 70% for the career diplomats and 30% for the infusion would be a fairly decent arrangement. But as I said, we are giving a more thought out process that will appear in the sessional paper, which we shall bring to Parliament for discussion. Thank you.
Senator Mudama.
Yes.
Your question has not been responded to adequately.
It has been responded, but Mr. Speaker, I just want to ask the CS if he can listen to me. Mr. CS, if you can listen. Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to request him.
Senator Kavindu, you know, an outstanding order.
He was talking and you are not seeing, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Kavindu, just have your seat. Please take your seat. Please.
Repeat what I was.
Just take your seat. You see, under standing orders, and more particularly Standing Order 51(7)C, 51(C)(7)C, states that the senator who has the primary question has a chance to ask 2 supplementary questions. Any other senator can only ask 1 supplementary question, which we do not have the provisions on standing order. All right, proceed. If you need clarification, that's quite okay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to tell Mr. CS that, Honorable CS, that these people have been waiting for their compensation for the last 26 good years. Many of them are dying. So as much as we are in good relationship with the Americans and we don't want to offend them, but let's follow up for the compensation of our people, please. They are dying in poverty. They are perishing in poverty. And even as a country, as Kenyans, we've not been able to assist them with anything, even medical assistance. Thank you.
Senator Cheriot.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Prime CS for finding time to respond to these questions. And it's not just in this House. I must appreciate him for his diligence, even outside this House, how he responds to issues raised by Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, my question is to piggyback on what Senator Sifuna had initially asked. Availability of government services, actually, to our citizens in the diaspora. I know, Mr. Speaker, that through eCitizen, Kenyans are now able to access thousands of government services online, and they're able to pay for the same and quickly receive solutions to their problems. The challenge with our diaspora citizens is that these services are either not available or a help desk to help them maybe respond to the issues such as what Senator Sifuna was speaking about, ID applications, renewal of passports, and the same. Yet, these are services that I want to believe, if his ministry, alongside the other state department that is in charge of citizen services, like eCitizen, Mr. Speaker, were to set up a help desk across our consulars, Mr. Speaker, then citizens will be saved from the trouble of having to travel thousands of kilometers sometimes, wasting money and time to access certain critical government services. So the question in brief, Mr. Speaker, is when are they going to make eCitizen services easily accessible and the issues that citizens have easily resolvable, Mr. Speaker, so that they don't struggle? I thank you.
Senator Eddy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the CS, the Prime CS, for being in the House today to answer these questions. I also wanted to piggyback on Senator Sifuna's questions on the efficiency of staffing, and particularly narrow it down to legal services. Looking at the United States, Mr. Speaker, having studied there and lived there for over 8 years, and having ties to the United States, Mr. Speaker, with the diaspora, the Kenyan in the diaspora, Mr. Speaker, there is a lot of challenges for our people there with regards to legal representations. Mr. Speaker, as you know, in the United States as well as other countries where our people are found, there are a number of people who get arrested, whether genuinely or for reasons otherwise. And after those arrests, some of them end up being incarcerated to the extent that their families cannot be able to access them. They don't have legal services. Mr. Speaker, a case in example is a former prominent presidential candidate, Mohamed Abdu Badida, who was incarcerated, and for months, almost 2 years, even our government did not know that he was under bars. He was behind bars, Mr. Speaker. And I just wonder whether there is proper legal services across the 52 states, because I know that in DC is where we have got 1 or 2 legal representations, but what is the ministry doing to make sure that our people in the United States have got representation across the United States? And is this also extended as services to other countries where we are seeing problems like war in Lebanon, where legal representation is a problem, as well as evacuation of our people in Lebanon? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Miraj.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question to the CS is concerning our sisters who are on the run in Saudi Arabia, whom, after following up with your ministry, I was updated that the Department for Diaspora had conducted some DNA tests because the sisters of ours had kids in the foreign country. And there's been a problem of them being deported with their kids back to Kenya. So my question is, for how long are our sisters to wait for this? Because they are not able to access the rescue centers in Saudi. So they are living on the run with small kids who are exposed to so many cruelty to the women who are left to take care of them. So my question is, Mr. CS, for how long do our sisters have to survive on the run while the matter is already in the attention of the ministry, and they are supposed to have been paying some legal fees for them to have the ownership of their kids? So my question is, for how long will our sisters be exposed in the Saudi Arabia before the government can take the necessary actions to bring them back with their kids to their nation? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Onyonka Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I would like to say that I'm happy to see the Cabinet Secretary, who is somebody I've worked with before and somebody I know very well. And Mr. Speaker, I would like to say that I am giving my appreciation of the fact that when about 2 weeks ago, we had an incident in Mali, and I called somebody in your ministry and told them that there are Kenyans who are in trouble, and I was surprised, pleasantly surprised, that the government was able to engage that team overnight, and the following morning, in fact, the Kenyans who are in trouble responded back and said, we are safe and thank you for intervening, and they thanked the officer in the ministry. I forget her name, and she did an excellent job. Mr. Speaker, the question I'm actually asking the CS is that when you look at what is happening in Lebanon, I've not seen the Kenyan government come up either explaining to the public what you intend to do with Kenyans who have been working there. There are cases of Kenyans who are calling us back. Do you have any plans to airlift those Kenyans in case the war continues? And is there a possibility that you can actually set up a fund from now on? Because most of the money that members of the Kenyan community are giving us in form of contributions or diaspora transfers is a lot of money. So I would like the minister to tell us whether there's a possibility they can set up a fund, and if possible, if it works well, so that anytime we have an emergency and anytime there are cases where Kenyans who are working outside Kenya and they're in trouble, whether there's a possibility that we can always airlift our people back and make sure that every Kenyans are safe, because the world is becoming a bit volatile. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator from Nandi, Senator Chiranke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mine is on the issue of, you see, Mr. Speaker, the money that came to this country through foreign exchange earner was 15,966 million in February 2024, according to the Central Bank of the Republic of Kenya. My question, Mr. Speaker, because this is the highest foreign exchange earner to the Republic, is about labor attaches. Mr. Speaker, you are aware the CS of labor was in this house a few months ago. My concern is, what is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and through the Prime Cabinet Secretary on the issue of labor attaches to ensure our young men and women, because the President has just signed what we call labor, there was the labor migration bill, and the President has signed for more people or young people to be taken. And Mr. Speaker, even on the issue of legal services, Mr. Speaker, you are aware we only have one legal advisor in New York. I remember there was a frustrated person from Kapsabet a few months ago, and I shared with the PS of Foreign Affairs. My concern, Mr. Speaker, what is the role of the Department of Diaspora Affairs in terms of handling such matters? Because I remember when I shared with the PS of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Speaker, the intervention took long. But my concern, it should be the Office of the Diaspora of Foreign Affairs through the PS, who is my very good neighbor. And he normally comes to Nandi occasionally, and he has even relatives. What can he do, Mr. Speaker, on these two matters that I've raised? I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Olekena.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me begin by appreciating the Prime Cabinet Secretary. These proceedings, Mr. Speaker, are live. And while seated here, I've just received a question from a Kenyan who live in the United States and another one who live in the UK. And their concern is one. The concern has got to do with a fiduciary responsibility of our embassies across the country. In the UK, the query is very simple. And Mr. Speaker, you'll allow me to refer to my message which has just been sent to me. And this relates to the address number 45 Portland Place, London, United Kingdom. And then the sort code is W1A 4GA. And the concern here is a very basic concern. It has to do with filing of annual returns for Government of Kenya. These are returns which are required for every embassy across. The United Kingdom requires this. So my question to the Prime Cabinet Secretary is that, are you aware that filing of annual returns by the Government of Kenya has not been consistent, specifically for the High Commission Office in the United Kingdom? And if so, what can be done to be able to ensure that we have a check system that will guarantee that we are compliant in those countries? Number two also has to do with our embassies abroad. Do we have any embassies that we own? And I ask this because of the issue of Uganda. Uganda, across the world, Idi Amin did something very, very honorable. He bought buildings for in every country. In New York, it's actually a walking distance to the United Nations headquarters. So I just wanted to confirm whether we have some that we own and also whether we are compliant in filing our returns, and if we are renting, if we are compliant in paying our rent. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Manzadani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while I ask a question in relation to Senator Sifuna's matter, I want to give the Cabinet Secretary good news from his office that recently a Catholic sister from my village who is working in Argentina sought help for good conduct so that she could be processed. And I just advised her on phone to get in touch with the ministry online. And Mr. Speaker, I want to surprise the Cabinet Secretary. Within 2 days, she had, everything had been processed and she was able to be employed in Argentina. And that shows that somebody somewhere, and this was the legal department, is doing something good in your ministry. But at the same time, Mr. Speaker, is there a policy in the event a Kenyan dies abroad? A lot of times, and especially those countries which do not keep bodies for long, especially countries which do cremation, and especially Islamic countries where funeral is conducted in a day. When a Kenyan passes away abroad, it becomes such a challenge, Mr. Speaker, such that by the time you get the body home, it has almost become the responsibility of member of parliament or senator. Is there a policy and so that there is a desk where Kenyans can report and because of our culture, our own people who are deceased could be taken care of with urgency and the families could be settled during bereavement? I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Prime CS, you may now proceed to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I must say that as we talk, there are what you might call emerging issues as well in this conversation. But let me start by saying that I think, and I believe what Honorable Senator Cheriot had in mind was to develop a Huduma Center approach to providing services for Kenyans in the diaspora in different capitals. And I think there is merit in this, and I can state that indeed, as we work with other departments, it's something that we are trying to enhance, especially around our consular services, so that there's a one-stop center for the services that Kenyans require. I wish to respond to some of the other issues in the following manner. The question of legal services, it is important, but I want to also just mention to the Kenyans that we are talking of almost 3.5 million Kenyans out there in different parts of the globe. Of course, the United States has the highest population, but in all the countries, we are talking of almost 3 million plus Kenyans who are in the diaspora. And the best we can do is that as much as we can have legal advisory services, sometimes within the embassies, depending on the resources available, we would strongly advocate that going forward, perhaps you can improve on this in terms of whether we have sufficient resources to back this particular service. But you will appreciate also that sometimes we have cases where Kenyans are in distress and some can signal the embassy and say they are in distress. There are others who do not speak at all when they are in distress, so you sometimes stumble on information, but maybe it was not volunteered by the person in question. And this is the example of the Dida case. We were reading about it. When he left, when he went, obviously it was his personal decision. But the communication as to his whereabouts or what he was doing, he was silent on this. So it becomes very difficult to be able to keep track on some of these. But our missions have intervened in various circumstances to try and guide Kenyans in distress and help them to access legal services in different areas. But please remember, it is a very expensive undertaking, and we would be misleading the House if we said that we can take up this role directly. It can be maybe under very special circumstances that an intervention is done. On the issue of Kenyans who may have died abroad, in the last, I think in the course of this year, Kenya, the Kenyan Foreign Ministry has assisted about 18 cases of Kenyans who may have died under different circumstances, and our embassies, our missions have been of assistance in trying to repatriate the remains to the country. And again, as I say, this is when the distress and the circumstances are on a case-by-case basis that you analyze and see what the circumstances are. We have the bilateral labor agreements, which we are working on. We have negotiated some, like with Germany, with Austria. These are now concluded. There are others that are in the pipeline. For instance, the Saudi government, we are working on how to improve our engagement when it comes to the labor movement. Recently, for instance, the Qatar Minister for Labor was here, and this was a conversation on how we can advance the conversation between Kenya and Qatar. So we'll continue streamlining the bilateral labor agreements so that any issue of immigration or migrant workers is in conformity with the international law. It also conforms to matters of human rights, and through these bilateral agreements we want to try and secure the dignity of Kenyans in the various places that they prefer to work in. On the issue of Lebanon, I just want to state that one, we have about 26,000 Kenyans in Lebanon, and obviously evacuating 26,000 is a very massive undertaking. But as a measure, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, through our embassy in Kuwait, was sending out messages so that those who are in distress can register. Even before the war escalated, this was ongoing. And I think we had received almost about 1,500 or so who had registered with the embassy, indicating that they may need support for evacuation. The others were quiet. And believe you me, Kenyans, senators, we also had a situation where the Kenyans there, out of their own volition, say they don't want to move. They want to hold out until the situation cools down. So we have that dilemma as well of Kenyans who hope for the best and do not want to move, and you cannot force them because we have to handle this in a humanitarian way. But the government of Kenya has set aside 100 million, and there's a committee in the Foreign Affairs working with the security and other agencies to see how this 100 million can be utilized to assist in the evacuation of Kenyans who are in Lebanon at this point in time. I may need to seek further clarification from the Honorable Senator Olekena, because the issue of the returns, maybe I need guidance a little more on what are the specifics of these returns, because we are also under the diplomatic arrangements, so we may need to seek clarification, and then we can tackle that particular issue. You came in and you did touch on the investments that Uganda made at that time. I think they were very lucky and they were wise in a way, but I had responded to it partially by saying that right now in New York, for instance, Kenya has bought a floor in a building, and I'm happy to state that during the UNGA conference, the Senator Ledama was with us in that very space that has been bought by the Kenyans in New York. But we have other assets. We have residential assets and so forth. And when we said that we have a global strategy, a strategy being developed for our global assets, we are going to share this conversation with you so that we can all have a unified position as Kenyans on how we can unleash the value and the potential of the assets we have in different countries abroad. There are quite a number. Whether on the African continent, or Europe, or now as we are talking in the US and so forth, or Asia, we need time to have a serious conversation on these assets. I wish to reiterate the issue about compensation, which the Senator for Machakos raised, and I want to reiterate that we are looking at it. But we must be conscious of the fact that we cannot dictate to the American Congress. We can submit Kenya's situation, but the procedure of